there has been no shortage of devastating events that have unfolded in the last few years. A global pandemic, political uncertainty, war in Ukraine, market volatility, gas prices, and inflation. And when we put these events side by side to each other and we compare them, they all have one thing in common. It's that no one saw it coming. No one predicted or published a report December 2019 that mentioned that we would all be hit with a global pandemic in 2020. And when we expand our time horizon to other terrible and devastating events that have taken place during our history and our time here, it has been events like 9/11, Great Depression, Pearl Harbor, just a few examples. And these events also have one thing in common. It's that no one saw it coming. No one predicted it. And the main takeaway, and something that we have learned in the last few years, is that if we don't consider it, we can't anticipate or prepare for it. Knowing this, the natural human response becomes to ask ourselves, what happens next? What is next? And that is our attempt, and it's a self-protective mechanism to be able to consider something so that we can anticipate or prepare for it. Because maybe, just maybe, if we do consider it, we can anticipate or prepare for it. One example I want to refer back on in terms of history is the financial crisis of 2008. There was an article published in the Wall Street Journal that predicted the end of the US. Now, this was during December 2008 when the financial crisis was just beginning. And there were many other examples that I could find that had a similar tone. It was predicting the end of the US, the end as we knew it at that time. Now, one thing I want to share is that when we look at the S&P 500, which contains the largest 500 companies within the US in terms of overall performance, if you had put your money in an index fund and you had invested during the lowest point during 2008 and you held on to that investment, ignored the news, you would have a 333% increase on your investment. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, yeah, that's an interesting example, but it's different this time. It's different this time are the four words that I hear a lot when we look back on history and we see how things have played out in reality. And one thing that I try to remind myself a lot is that predictions that are happening in the moment are just facts multiplied by stories. And one example is like a company's valuation. Company's valuation is composed of what you know times some sort of multiple in terms of where they're going to be in the next 5, 10, 15, or 20 years. And what you know are things like revenue, cash flow, profits. The multiple is essentially calculated based on the anticipated growth, what we think the market is going to value in a certain period of time, whether it's 5, 10, 15, 20 years. The further, of course, you move out, the less reliable the valuation becomes. Now, one interesting thing to point out is that stories are just a combination of what we want, what we think, and what we've seen. That's what stories are. And one thing that we've learned with all of these events, whether it's been the global pandemic, war in Ukraine, political uncertainty, gas prices, whatever it's been, it's that no one saw it coming. And so when you don't see something coming, it becomes less predictable. And said differently, when you apply stories to facts, it stops becoming a fact. Because it's very similar to mathematical law where facts are numbers and stories are zeros. And anything multiplied by 0 equals 0. So the next question becomes, what do we do? What do we know? What do we do if we don't know what happens next? And the best thing that I can share is to be able to learn to differentiate what's noise from signal. And I define signal as what's important. One way to think about it is if you have this graph and you look at the two different axes, what's important is on essentially the y-axis. The higher up you go, the more important it becomes. And on the x-axis, you essentially have things that are more common versus more rare. As you go further to the right, they become more rare. Things like gossip, clickbait, hearsay, rumors, uninformed analysis, or even biased analysis, those are things that are composed of what's noisy. What are signals are things like good analysis. That's something that's relevant to you. It calls out certain biases, or content where the outputs inspire you to take action, or they inspire you to change how you think about a particular topic. And from being exposed to many different topics in the last few years, and just that overall diversity, the two steps that I can recommend to anyone is to, step one, read things you disagree with, and step two, revisit your beliefs. The first part is definitely more passive. It's very easy to read things that you disagree with. Yes, you might have an emotional response, but revisiting beliefs is actually the thing that's harder, because revisiting your beliefs is something that is an active choice. It's taking a look at when you've been presented with new information on whether your beliefs still make sense. And it also helps you craft more defensible point of views, not so you can win an argument, so that you can have a more productive conversation that actually goes somewhere versus leads to an argument. So you're probably thinking, I get this. I get that it's important, but really, why? And the way that I like to think about it is similar to oil, coal, natural gas, nuclear energy. These four things have something in common where they're all non-renewable resources. It's actually very difficult to produce these things naturally at the same rate that they are being consumed. They're being consumed at a faster rate. I think something similar that we all have our own non-renewable resources. Our time, our attention, our energy, these are examples of non-renewable resources that we have within us. And they're very, very valuable, and it's very vulnerable to be giving away these things to things that we can't necessarily control. And as humans, we value so many different things. We value things like accumulating knowledge, learning new things, connecting with others, putting our knowledge to good use, and being an expert, subject matter expert in a specific vertical, and being talented in that sense. Power. Some people love to accumulate likes and followers, especially in the social media age that we live in. Adventure. Some people want to accumulate novel experiences. And some people want to accumulate wealth and things like, money and just materials. I'm not here to argue which one of these values is more important than the other. The most important thing is that you are able to communicate that to yourself. But it's important to know this, because I think the most important thing out of everything that we've learned is to be able to control the controllables, to focus on the things that we are able to actually predict if we put our behavior to good use. And so the best advice that I can give is to be able to trade our non-renewable resources, our time, our attention, our energy, on the things that we value and control. If you have any questions, or if you want to provide any feedback on this presentation, feel free to drop me a line at tktalin@gmail.com. Thanks a lot.